Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming today's presenter, Cam Malthaner, and his topic is what every student affairs professional needs to know about guidance, life design, and equity in careers. So please join me in welcoming Cam. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sadia. Welcome, everyone. Saving the best session for last breakout, or breakout plenary session, whatever we want to call it. As you can see on the screen, my name is Cam. I work at Western University. I am a career coach undergraduate students there. And today we're going to go through what everyone needs to know about guidance, life design, equity, and careers. This session was predominantly created with other student affairs professionals in mind who don't necessarily work within career development, but face those sorts of questions, how to respond, things to say, a little bit of, career development 101. But that being said, if there are any other career development folks in the room, welcome, you're my people. Hopefully you can get some refreshers on things or new perspectives, theories, takeaways, tools that you might want to incorporate in your own praxis. So I would actually love it if folks wanted to add to the chat just what your role is, what area you work in, student conduct, academic advising, anything like that, just so I know who our audience is. And then while you're doing that, or I guess just after, I would just like to add a little bit of a personal land acknowledgement. The one that Sadia gave was very beautiful and well done. But one thing that I like to start adding is just a bit of a personalized land acknowledgement. So I was reading a book recently, I think it was Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga, and I learned that there were only 2 residential schools in Southern Ontario. So got me thinking, got me looking into it. Turns out there's one in Brantford, which is where my mother grew up and where my grandparents currently live, and then one in Muncie, Ontario. If you're not familiar where that is about 30-minute drive from Western and about 20 minutes from my childhood home, where I grew up in the London area. So while I was doing that research, aka Google Maps, to say, oh my gosh, the Mount Elgin Residential School was how close? I also learned that the reserve, singular, I thought I grew up next to, is actually divided between 3 different nations, the Oneida, the Chippewa, the Thames, and the Muncie, Delaware. So just a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of research and engagement showed me how much I learned about the past and the present. So I think it just speaks to no matter how much you think you've learned, there's always a little bit more that we can do. So that's just a little bit of my acknowledgement of the land that I'm currently situated on. Also, just looking at the chat, some academic advising, some career services, seeing some accessible education. That's awesome. Thank you so much for participating, folks. What are we going to talk about today? This is the, fancy institutional language of the learning outcomes. Really just want to talk about, what are career development theories? What is it? How can you apply it to a myriad of student interactions in your role? Reframing some dysfunctional beliefs, in other words, myth busting, common things about careers that might be helpful for you to carry forward, as well as being able to take a critical eye to things that you do or things that your institution does that might be adding additional barriers to student success from an equity lens. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me. We're going to have a moment for some reflection that we'll carry with us throughout the rest of the activity. Go over some basic career development theories, career development 101, do some myth busting, talk a bit about equity, inclusivity, and then hopefully tie it all back together and connect the dots. I will thank everyone for holding with me and, me wearing my professional gaming headset. It was the best quality mic I had available. And I will also warn that I talk with my hands a lot. How much? I'm using a clicker and my keyboard is about 6 inches away from my hands. So do with that information what you will. And on that note, a little bit about me. And since I'm going to be talking about equity and inclusivity, and also just so you know where I'm coming from, a little bit of my positionality, that's me. These are the identity groups that I belong to. I think most are pretty self-explanatory. White, cis, bi, non-Indigenous, settler, hetero-presenting relationship, which gives me a lot of privilege as I, present as straight, able-bodied, agnostic, young, upper middle class. Cool. I want to talk a little bit about my story and how I got to where I am. And as I go through this, I want you to start thinking about your own story. If you were to tell it in a similar way, where it matches with mine, where it doesn't, because I'm going to ask you to reflect on that in a little bit. So When I was younger, particularly in high school, heavily involved, wide range of activities, musical theater, computer science, athletics. Find not that many people captain of their high school football team, but who are also in every drama department production that their school put on, right? I had a wide range of interests. And so I got to university and I got very involved in student leadership, orientation, residence life, academic advising, and mentorship. And the whole time, I thought I was going to go to med school, as many students I talk to often do. And I got involved with those things simply because I thought it would be fun, right? And I remember one distinct moment when I was working as a residence advisor, and I thought to myself, wow, this is so cool. I wish I could just do this as a job. Anyway, back to studying for med school, right? There's connection just wasn't quite there. But I started around the time that all my friends were applying to volunteer in hospitals and get research positions. And I remember very distinctly thinking, ugh, that sounds awful. I don't want to do any of that. So then I took a step back and said, okay, I don't want to work in a hospital. I don't want to do research. I'm not enjoying nor thriving in any of like my pre-med science courses. Is this really what I want to do? So I took a step back and I started thinking more critically about, the people around me and the people I looked up to, specifically my residence managers, as I was involved with residence life. And I saw, well, they have degrees from all over the place and they can do a good job. And hey, maybe I can be, a professional RA. Started looking at that. So once I realized that degrees weren't as important for the direction I wanted to go in, my elective in classical studies became a minor, which became a double major. I overloaded in my fourth year because I had to finish on time. Wouldn't recommend it. So I ended up with a weird double major. And I'll tell you exactly what it was later. So after that, I took a step back and I said, okay, I might want to go into student affairs, but I really think I'd enjoy being a high school teacher because I thought about my wide range of interests, right? That I talked about. How can I stay involved in coaching athletics and academics and being part of a community, but also helping out with theater and computer science and all those things. I thought teaching sounded like a perfect fit. So did my Master of Teaching program. And one of the phenomenal things about that is that with any teacher education program, you get an internship, right? You're a student teacher. You get to test the waters before you even graduate. And I learned pretty quickly within my student teaching that being a teacher, not really my thing. I liked being in a classroom. I liked working with students. But the two big things for me was number one, there wasn't as much of a work-life balance as I would have wanted. If anyone ever tells you that, oh, teaching is easy because you only work 6 hours a day, 10 months a year, please slap them in the face for me. The amount of after hours work that you do between lesson planning and marking, it was exhausting. I'd come home from a long day of teaching, super long commute, and then I would just have to immediately start working on the next day's materials. Not really for me. The second thing was that, as I told you a little bit of science, pre-med, biology was my main teachable. You can only tell students that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell so many times before you think, is this really what I want to do for the next few decades, right? Is this the rest of my career? I wanted to talk about bigger topics. I wanted to get more involved in student growth and development. So back to res life, started working in student affairs full time, ended up in my current role, transitioning from residence life to career education. I also dabbled with guidance counseling for a little bit. So very roundabout way of getting where I am now. That is Bachelor of Art, Master of Teaching, Ontario College of Teacher, Certified Career Development Practitioner in progress, hence the asterisks, and to be determined, because who the heck knows where I'm going to go after this. Now, keeping that in mind, I want to go through a bit of an activity, get some more engagement, get some involvement, because as much as I like attention, I don't like talking about myself that much. So that was a very stressful 5 minutes. But here are some common beliefs on the screen. These are things that you may have heard from your students, but I'd be willing to bet that some of them are things that you have felt yourself at some point. They might still be some things that you think now. I need to know what I'm doing by now. Everyone else has it figured out but me. There aren't many jobs for people with my degree. I just need to find my passion. Once I'm successful, then I'll be happy. You can't get a good job with just a bachelor's degree. You're settling if you aren't working in your field. I need to live my best life. Career changes are difficult, so I need to make a good decision now. And then picking a job title, work towards it, best way to plan. So put in the chat, please. How many of these have you believed at some point? Is it one? Is it all 10? Is it a mix? take a second, look through it. How many of these have you personally felt at one point or another? I already see some comments coming in. All of them, yes. Yep, just about all of them, right? Okay, I love it. You're proving my point. This is phenomenal. So what I'm going to do now is, okay, 6 to 8, 7, I like it. Yeah, and still think some of these, absolutely. We're going to come back to these later, I promise. But here's what I want you to do. Thinking about the way that I told my story, I want you to just take 2 minutes and tell your story. Journal it privately. If you're able to, tell it to someone beside you, speak it out loud. Presumably, if you're taking notes or if you have something to write on, that'd be best. And sort of just think about, how did you get to where you are now? And also, if you want another question to just go off of and expand, why do you do what you do? I was at a couple of weddings over the most recent long weekend. Yes, multiple weddings, same weekend. I was in the bridal party of both of them. It was wild, but it's a wedding. Catching up with people you haven't seen in a long time, especially, with the pandemic, a lot of family members reuniting, people, seeing each other for the first time, high school friends reuniting. The amount of conversations I heard that were, oh, hey, I'm so-and-so, nice to meet you. What do you do? Oh, I'm in nursing. Oh, that's nice. And then conversation's done, right? I learned this person's vocation. I know everything I need to know about them. Ridiculous. So I like to ask why you do what you do. But think about that. And then as you go through that, compare your story to some of the beliefs that we just looked at. Did you contradict any of those ideas? For example, did you change majors? Did you enter university planning on ending up in your current role? So I'm going to put on some music. I'll put the beliefs back up there. Please tell me if the music is not working or too loud. I'm going to take exactly 2 minutes, write your story, and then start reflecting. Okay. Thank you to all the positive comments in the chat. I love it as well. Glad you appreciate the music selection. Thought it would be some nice tunes to think to and journal to, while also being exactly 2 minutes. So wonderful. If anyone wants to put in the chat any reflections you got from that, I can assume that 2 minutes was not nearly enough to both tell your story and reflect, but bit of a packed session. So we're going to motor through a bit. And I will just mention, not only for this, but for a few of the other activities that I have coming up later on, we're not going to have nearly enough time to go through them and give you enough time to reflect in adequate depth. So if you would like to download this slide deck, you'll see that in Feedloop. If you scroll down to the bottom, session files, all my slides are there. So you can follow along if you'd like, but then also take this away, do some of these reflection activities as well in your own time when you have a bit more of a chance to get through it and not feel the time crunch. So I already see one comment in the chat. I did not end up teaching in the traditional sense, as was my original goal at university, but realized that I am teaching in my current role and many that preceded this one as an accessible learning advisor. Past teaching roles, volunteer coordinator, member volunteer training, instructional assistant. Yes. Fell into my career after years of believing all these things during many entry-level positions in various corporate environments. Now a career practitioner at a college. Phenomenal. All I can say that this is about the journey, not about getting there. Yes, absolutely. Transferred schools, changed my major, dropped out of teachers college, did a master's because I missed the deadline on a different master's program, had a goal, did an internship. These are phenomenal, right? And I love these stories. So please keep these in mind because we are walking embodiments of career development theories and best practices. And I really, really find that students can empathize a lot and they find it very helpful if you can give actual examples of figuring out, well, actually, that's not true. Look at what I have a degree in, because I guarantee not many of you have a degree that's super duper closely related to your current role, at least not an undergraduate degree, right? You can't exactly major in university administration. So a lot of times we do embody these ideas. Okay, more comments coming in. I promise you I'm reading them. Don't know if I'll have time to get to them out loud, but thank you so much for engaging. So next section rather, going to go through some career development basics. I'm going to throw a lot of theories at you. I didn't include a bibliography section in this slide deck because I didn't really want to, but most of these are taken all from this one textbook. So if you want, further readings or to look into anything in a bit more depth, please feel free to send me a message. I can send you some more resources, but if you want a quick look, recommend that book. I will also mention, as I'm going through things, these 2 slides are a little bit text heavy, so I do apologize for that. Please feel free to grab the PDF version if you'd like to follow along, if you need to zoom in as well. Keep note of anything that really resonates with you, any particular theories that sound cool, or anything that is really hitting home, because I'll ask you to reflect on this. So 3 common theories that you might see. I will also give the caveat that yes, these are, relatively lengthy and complex theories that I'm trying to boil down into 2 to 3 bullet points. Obviously, just a very cursory look. Really, what I want folks to take away from this section is just what are some of the general themes that we see in career development, right? What do career development theories look like? What do evidence-informed practices look like? Take away a little bit, because there are some common themes that you might see throughout. But if we look at them, Holland's vocational personalities, you might have heard this, Holland codes or RIASEC codes, RIASEC. Don't ask me what they all stand for because I don't remember right now, because those 6 letters is domains of personality. And so Holland's big idea is that everything is about personality. Everyone is broadly personality into 6 domains, and then we are amalgamations of the top 3. And then our workplaces will also fit that. So you might be social, enterprising, and artistic. If those are your top 3 things, you want to find a work domain that fits that. Those people that have those will be attracted to the same type of work. And so it's about finding that fit where between your environment and your personality as well. Then you want to figure out, what people am I working with? Is this environment fitting? I think we've all had jobs that we weren't fully satisfied with, maybe not because of the work itself, but a lot of times because of the environment that we're in. Super's development theory, a little bit of an older one, but it's probably my personal favorite. Don't let that bias you, because they focus on 2 main things. Number 1 is the idea that career development is a series of approximations, not a single decision. What he means by that is that you are just taking guesses and trying things out while you try to get closer and closer to a final, not a final career, but careers that you enjoy, right? Which I really see mirrored in my journey, the way that I went from sort of thing to thing to thing, taking stock of these are the parts that I like, these are the parts that I don't like. How can I get closer to where I am? The second thing about this that's helpful is that you also want to consider the roles that you play in your life, because work is not the only thing we do. You also have roles as a parent, as a partner, as a citizen, right? Everyone getting ready to vote tomorrow for those in Ontario, if you haven't voted already. Thinking about how those roles interplay, figuring out what does work mean to us? How does that part of ourselves balance with the rest? And then where does that fit into society? Figuring out, who I am, where I fit, how does that fit with everything else? Series of circumscription and compromise. This is a little bit more of like taking an equity lens to think about accessibility, identity, and privilege. And as we mature, we form ideas about power and privilege, and we begin to rule out certain careers. This is very applicable when you think about representation and why it matters, right? This is, rooted in a lot of feminist theory and framework. So you think about, if you don't see many female scientists, young females are going to not see themselves represented. They might rule out those careers consciously or subconsciously, closing doors a little early, leading to what psychologists can call identity foreclosure, giving up on certain, I am not a blank, right? How often have we felt that, right? I'm not a math person, so I'm never going to even consider engineering, right? A lot of us made that decision when we were in elementary school. And so can be a little bit of a problem. And then thinking about, where do I fit into society, right? What is society telling me? What is my understanding of self? Where does that fit? 3 more theories for you. Career construction, very, very similar about, sense of self, societal fit, but also considering things like economic trends, labor markets, external factors. And one approach that it really likes to take is thinking, who are your role models, right? Who do you look up to? What about them do you admire? And then how can you become more like that, right? Working on that sense of self. Psychology of working theory, one of my favorite ones to introduce, very important because it challenges a lot of the assumptions. Assumptions like everyone can have a career. Everyone has a choice in where they find work. Work is central in a lot of people's lives. This is challenging all of those assumptions by saying that sometimes it's just about finding work. What does work mean, right? Does volunteering, unpaid labor hours, particularly, you see that, if anyone's read the book Invisible Women, women's unpaid care work, that counts as work, even though traditional career counseling might discount it because it's unpaid, right? Thinking about that, and then also just taking a bit more of an equity lens and saying, not everyone gets to sit here and dream up their career. So I really like juxtaposing that with the theory of work adjustment, because that one is all about adjusting work. It's not, try a job, leave it, try a job, leave it. It's saying, look at where you are, look at your environment. How can those adjust? Can you adjust your environment to fit yourself a bit better? Or can you adjust yourself or the way you view yourself to fit your environment a little bit? I think that while that one's valid, I'm not going to, disparage any certain theory. I think it's fun looking at that besides psychology of working, right? Because for roles like us, if I said, hey, I want to take more of a role in leading our career development workshops, I have that option based on my privilege and the type of position I'm in. If you're a bus driver, for example, you can't really adjust your job or adjust your environment around your own needs and your personality interests that much, right? You can put a bobblehead on the dashboard, but at the end of the day, you can't really change that much about your role. So psychology of working keeps a lot of that in mind. Told you that was going to be rapid fire. So just to summarize a bit, some key themes. It really all begins with sense of self and identity, right? Who am I? What are my goals, values, interests, strengths? Where do I see myself? How do I see myself? And then not really going to get into it here, but if you're curious, or if you're one of the people like me who loves assessment and data, that's where, career assessments can come in, right? If you need to understand, who am I? What do I enjoy? What do I want? Do a quiz, right? I'm sure everyone here has taken some sort of career assessment at some point. I enjoy working with the elderly, strongly agree, strongly disagree, spits out a list of job titles. I could go on about them, but just if you're wondering where assessments fit in career development, typically there, right? Good place to start. Once you figured out your sense of self, where do I fit in society? What careers fit that image? How can I find my place? And so if you're talking with students, this can be really helpful to keep in mind that they might be struggling with one of these two phases. Either they aren't quite sure who they are or how they see themselves, or they're not quite sure where that would fit in society. They might know themselves, but they're not sure of what jobs are available or what fields are out there. That sort of congruence. As well, figuring out, what does work mean to me? How does that fit within my view of self? You might be familiar with work-life balance versus, some of the other theories, right? Versus work-life integration. That's a personal thing that a lot of people need to figure out. And it's very important when they're planning their careers. Exploring options, making iterative decisions, plural, right? Not a one-time decision. It's a journey. You're going to make missteps and changes and pivots, and then test those assumptions. I assumed that I was going to love being a high school teacher because I had a great time when I was in high school. Turns out that the thing I loved about being a student was just hanging out with my friends all day, not actually being in the classroom itself. Sounds a little obvious in retrospect, but that was an assumption that I needed to test out and learn a bit of the hard way. As well, last but not least, be cognizant of contextual factors that shape our beliefs and our decisions, right? Like power, privilege, those sorts of structures, in addition to labor market trends, family dynamics, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So that is career development in a nutshell, summarized, brought to you by Cam. Take another second to reflect, right? If you have a journal, you're taking notes. Think about, did any of those particularly resonate with you? Any of those ideas or specific theories? I don't blame you if you didn't write down the name of it, because why would you? But an example for myself, right? Super Siri. I mentioned it was my favorite because it's all about successive approximations. I went into teaching thinking, okay, I like this, I don't like this. I went into residence life thinking, I like this, and I still like this. Don't like this, learned that about myself, ended up in career development. So take a second, reflect to yourself, and think about, do any of these match? Because as I mentioned, it's really, really powerful if we can frame our own experiences to students as examples of career development ideas, especially if you have the language. A lot of students, they place a lot of emphasis on data, right? As they should. Hearsay or one anecdote from, an academic counselor about, oh, well, here's how my career ended up. If you say this is based in evidence, you can look up the name of the theory. I'm an example of that. It can really go a long way to instilling some of those messages. So, one more framework for you. I apologize, I hit it at the end. I just want to talk very briefly about life design. It's in the title of the slide, or title of the presentation session, rather. And this is the framework that we use at Western within our entire careers and experience department. This is the framework we use. Obviously, individual career coaches are allowed to, pull or pick and choose different things that they work for their practice, but this is our overall framework. And this is the process that it goes through right here. This is design thinking, as in product design. This was founded by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. They're out of Stanford University, Silicon Valley. They worked as, product designers and engineers before thinking, how can we apply this mindset and how can we apply this framework to career development? So within the design process, step one is empathize. If you're designing an iPad, you want to figure out, okay, what are the user's needs? What are their wants? In this case, you are the user. Figure out what your needs and your wants are, right? Seeing that same theme. Step one, figure out who you are. Step two, which I really like that this caveat is added in there, is defining the problem. A lot of times, the problem that we think we're working on is actually not the one that, is necessarily the best way forward. We're going to come back to, those dysfunctional beliefs, those myths about careers. And you might say, I just need to find a good job for people with anthropology degrees. Not necessarily the best way to go about that. And we're going to talk about what is, right? But that's defining the problem. Step three is just brainstorming. Imagine different possibilities and different futures. What are some different paths I could go down? What are some things that I might enjoy? How could I go about that? Step four is prototyping, right? In product design, you want to come up with a new technology. You create a cheaper version that's easily accessible. You can test it out really quick, do some small kinks. In the case of life design, this is trying things out, such as doing a student teacher placement, right? That was a little taste of being a high school teacher without fully committing. You can also do job shadowing, just talking to people, right? Informational interviews, if anyone knows that phrase. Just different ways of testing your assumptions, looking at things and saying, okay, how can I get a sample of that career? How can I try it out? Then last but not least, once you've prototyped, you think, yeah, that works well, seems to really fit, you go forward with it. So coming back to the dysfunctional beliefs, the 10 common myths about career development, this is a big part of life design. This is what we would call defining the problem. So I want to tell you why each one of these are bunk. Number one, I need to know what I'm doing by now. I think, as is demonstrated in the chat, careers can change. Careers can pivot. Careers can switch. Myself, I'm relatively early in my career, but you can see how all over the place my career has already been. It's never too late to design a life that you love. And honestly, you see the stats thrown out all the time. I don't have a great head for figures, but 80% of jobs in the year 2030 don't exist yet, right? I'm sure we've all heard something like that. So thinking that, I need to have it exactly figured out, not usually how it works. Everyone else has it figured out but me. That's a lie. Just straight up, I think most of us have probably figured it out by now, but we're all just sort of doing our best out here. It can be really difficult when everyone else seems confident or everyone else knows what they're doing. I talk a lot with students who are about to graduate and, all my friends have already gotten accepted to grad school or they have jobs lined up. I'm just sitting here. I don't know what's coming next. And that's okay. One thing that I always tell students is if you are the only person who didn't have it figured out, I would not have a job. We would not have an entire careers department with like 5 career coaches if there was one student who was kind of lost. So that usually puts people a bit more at ease. There aren't many jobs for people with my degree, as I'm sure a lot of us have known, from having degrees in different fields from all over the place. majors don't really matter that much once you get outside of university. Of course, there are some jobs where it's important. That's about 20% of all jobs, regulated occupations. If you want to be a nurse, you need a nursing degree. If you want to build bridges, please get an engineering degree first. But for everything else, employers are going to care about skill and experience far more about a specific major. I just need to find my passion. This one is, so two things about this. Number one, most people don't have a single identifiable passion. Most people have lots of things that they're passionate about. And number two, this is actually something that's really, really interesting, and you can look more into the research on it. But most of the time, passions are a result of the work that we do. Passions develop and grow rather than being a driving force. I was talking to a colleague earlier today, and we were talking about what's one thing that you're proud of in your work? What's one thing that you have an impact on? This colleague of mine, they work in our experiential learning department. And so they were talking about how they connect different community partners and like small nonprofits to courses on Western that, have community involvement, some sort of practicum or fieldwork as part of their course. So specifically, it was a nonprofit based in London that focuses on providing food security to LGBTQ plus folks. And she was talking about how proud she was and how passionate she was that she was able to connect this super small volunteer-based startup to a course on Western that was able to help them out. The students, I think it was a poli-sci course that focused on the marginalization of queer communities. So they learned a lot. They got to apply some of what they were, learning in the classroom. While that food bank, they got a lot of help. And if you think that when my colleague was in university, she was sitting there saying, I know exactly what I want to do because my passion is connecting small nonprofits with courses at a university that focus on food security. That's ridiculous, right? No one, you don't have that passion ahead of time, but that's something that develops and grows. So get that out of there. Once I'm successful, I'll be happy. This is something that we'll talk a little bit about when it comes to equity and inclusivity, but I always just ask students if I hear this, what does success look like? Right? What do you mean when you say I'll be successful? Is it having a prestigious job title? Is it making a lot of money? Is it having a position of power? And then once, you actually drill down to that, where'd you get that idea? Is that something you actually believe? If I asked you, what does success mean? Oh, it means, making a lot of money. Okay, well, is that important to you? Or is that just what you think everyone else defines success as? And who are you trying to live your life for? You can't get a good job with just a bachelor's degree. No, there are lots of jobs out there. I mean, I will say that higher education is becoming more and more prevalent, at least, especially, within my role, my department at Western, almost everyone here has a master's degree, but really show them examples, right? You can look on LinkedIn to say, here are some people who've recently graduated from our school. They only have a bachelor's degree, but look at the job that they're doing, right? There are lots of good jobs out there. Showing examples is usually the best way to go about this. You're settling if you aren't working in your field. Why? Says who? Again, where'd you get that idea? Is that actually something that you believe? And then just reiterating that unless you're going into a regulated occupation, majors aren't the most important thing in the world. Share some personal experience if you can. An example that I like to give is recently, I went to a mortgage broker. My fiance and I are trying to buy our first home, and he had a degree in political science and sociology. You would think of all the people to have a finance degree, it would be someone who calculates mortgages for a living, but no, he had a degree, decided he didn't want to pursue anything directly in those fields. He was good with people, good with money, ended up finding a career that works for him. I need to live my best life. This is the one that usually gets a lot of people because they're like, what do you mean? This isn't a myth. One thing that I would push and challenge on that is, why do you think that there's only one best life? A lot of times in life design, they ask, how many lives are you? Because there are lots of great lives that you could lead, right? I could, continue what I'm doing. I could be a high school teacher. I'd be happy there. I wasn't miserable in my time. I just felt for a little bit more, but there are lots of great lives that would still leave you happy and fulfilled. It's just about choosing one path. You don't have to find the perfect path or the right path, because the amount of pressure that adds unnecessarily could really debilitate a lot of people. Career changes are difficult, so you need to make a good decision now. Similar to before, no, career changes are common. They happen all the time. The olden days of just, I'm going to pick a major, work for 40 years, retire. That's really not how the world of work functions anymore. Like I said, new jobs are coming up all the time. Job titles are misleading. Industries are becoming, created and shrinking by the day. Anyone here, invest in crypto or NFTs, seeing the rise and fall of that? No one could predict those sorts of things. So career change is not necessarily difficult. And similarly, picking a job title and working towards it, think about things you want to do. Think about, what's meaningful to me, what's impactful to me, what sort of challenges do I want to work on? Picking a job title is you don't know what you don't know. I guarantee almost none of us here have a job title that if we were asked when we were in elementary school, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would not have said career coach undergraduate students. Of course not. Picking a job title is it's a really limiting way, right? If you're saying, I want to be a blank, think about, these are the things I want to do. This is why I do what I do. So that's me graduating from Western before coming back full circle with my double major in genetics and classical studies. People usually get a kick out of that because I have yet to find anyone who has that double major. If you know someone, please connect with me afterwards because I would love to meet them. But I usually like to tell that to students, right? Because they think, career coach must be business or psychology. Nope. Genetics and classical studies. So very fun. Yes, thank you. I think it's a fun combo too. Anyway, getting into the final section, I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat. Yes, it's okay if you don't know everything now. People falling into their current position. I love it. One step further by asking where the idea of success came from. Yeah, and that's a lot of it. If you get into ideas of coaching or moving on, a lot of it is just asking open-ended questions, right? If anyone has heard of motivational interviewing, you don't want to sit here and be like, no, that's wrong. Your ideas are bad. Say, where did you get that idea? What evidence would change your mind? And really helping people develop the thought processes themselves. So yes, the assumption that there's only one chance, one choice, it does take a long time to unlearn because that pressure is put on us from a very early age. But again, by providing examples, by talking about yourself, any colleagues, friends, any peers that they know, right? Ask them, do you have any older siblings? What do they do for work? Did they always know that they were going to do that? Sometimes it's helpful just to see those things in action. So culturally relevant career coaching, inclusivity, anti-racism, whatever you want to call it. Again, keep in mind, my positionality. So a white dude talking about inclusivity, take that for what it is, but also know that, not every form of privilege is visible, right? I mentioned I'm in a hetero-presenting relationship, but I identify as bisexual. So while being part of the LGBTQ plus community, that is something that very, very few people would ever know about me at first glance. So keeping that in mind, thinking about personality, identity, and environment. These are three super broad categories that end up shaping our choices and our decisions. Personality is what most traditional career assessment looks at, right? Things like, what are my goals? What are my interests? That sort of thing. It can be helpful for getting to know someone, right? Asking, what are your values? What are your aspirations? But when you're considering inclusivity, it usually doesn't really touch on too many of those topics. Identity, those are the things that, I think most people know identity, right? Race, religion, gender identity, class, marital status, whatever. A lot of times, these can be obvious, right? The fact that I am white, other times not. I'm LGBTQ+. If it comes, you're talking to a student, I always say only ask if it's directly relevant. I will have students say, I can only work so many hours a week. And I'll say, is that related to work permits or, immigration status? Because I know that students that are on study permits usually have a cap for how many hours a week they can ask, right? So I'll ask then, is it an immigration status thing? I would never look at a student and say, oh, well, you must be an international student, so therefore XYZ, right? Because you have no idea those sorts of things. And other times, I always say to, just treat everyone equitably and assume those sorts of things, and then explore invitations. So one example that I like to give, again, my sexuality. I don't often introduce myself to people or, just come right out the gate, yelling, I am bisexual. But I might make a joke about, well, I'm 2/3 of the way to being a straight white man. So that's a bit of an invitation, right? What do you mean by that? Because I'm more than happy to talk about it. I just feel weird bringing it up unprompted. So if I throw something out like that, or if you hear a student make a comment or a reference like that, feel free to ask for clarification. And if they get uncomfortable, obviously respect their boundaries, back off. But a lot of times they do want to talk about those things. They just aren't sure how to bring them up directly. Lastly, the only other thing I'll mention about identity is that this can be conscious. I'm only applying to part-time jobs because of my permit, or subconsciously, right? Remember talking about circumscription theory, identity foreclosure, thinking about what are gender roles, what is self-image, right? I cannot tell you how many students I have, particularly male identifying students, who come in and say, maybe med school isn't for me. It's super competitive. I'm not sure if I want the stress, but I'm really, really passionate about healthcare. And I'm like, okay, if you're super passionate about healthcare, but you don't want to be, medical school, have you thought about nursing? And just thinking about, the societal stigma and the gender role ideas about male nurses, most of them never even consider it, right? They closed that door a long time ago. So thinking about that, then also intersectionality, it's a whole other can of worms. And then factoring that with environment as well. Thinking about what are, cultural expectations, familial obligations, again, definitions of success, that can often be rooted in environment and culture. Barriers that they might be facing, socioeconomic status, that's what SES is for those unaware, accessibility, those sorts of things. People might be unaware that the environment has shaped their beliefs and values. And so that's something you can explore, right? If I ask a student, what is your definition of success? Where'd you get that? They might say, oh, it's my family or it's my culture. And so you can figure out, what are the strongest factors that are shaping that? But then also, are you okay with it? Because someone might say, you know what? I don't really care about, science, but I'm going to be a dentist because my parents really want me to go to dental school. And you can sit there unpacking that and say, okay, well, is that really what you want? They might say, no, but there is nothing in the world more important to me than making my family and my parents proud. And that's okay. That's their choice, right? And so going with that and just helping them reflect and then respecting their decision, because that's what coaching and career development is all about. So when it comes to respecting culture, I always say, use cultural knowledge to inform conversations, but don't make assumptions, right? You never want to make any assumptions. So the example from before about work hours, right? I would use that knowledge to say, okay, I know that Canadian study permits usually cap, 20 hours per week, but I'm not going to assume that a student is on a study permit. And even if I do know that, I'm still going to refer them to our international department to give actual advice around permits and immigration and those sorts of requirements, because that's not my area. I just know that while I'm talking to them, if they say, I want part-time work, I'm not going to, bulldoze that and say, you should apply for full-time work, because I'm aware of these factors. Thinking about cultural beliefs as well, right? A lot of times, and there are so many cultures out there with the stereotype of, parents demanding that you be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. So you can keep that in mind. But if I meet a student from one of those cultures who's, in the sciences, I would never just say, oh, well, you're probably only here because of your parents, right? Sounds obvious, bears repeating. Never generalize, assume, or stereotype. Use these things to inform your practice and be aware of different factors and potentialities, but we're not doing any of those no-nos. As well, check your own biases and beliefs. Are you giving advice based on your own viewpoint? I always say, the big example that I come back to, it's a very Western mindset, the hemisphere, not the school, to prioritize individuality, right? It's a very, very common thing to say, follow your heart, chase your dreams, forget everyone else, do what you want to do. But again, there are a lot of cultures where that would be the worst, that would be awful. They might be, much, much happier and more fulfilled having a proud family and a close community in a career that they feel 50-50 about than I'm living my dream life, but my parents don't talk to me anymore, right? You have to consider what people want, what their cultural expectations are, and those sorts of things. A little bit more specifically about careers. Like I said, ask questions, notice those invitations if they're trying to share a bit about their identity or some things that might be shaping their beliefs. Differentiate between expectations, goals, and dreams. That can be another really big thing. It's okay, you want to, I don't know, get into law school, right? Is that a dream? Is that a goal? Or is that just an expectation that's been set out for you? And then talking about, okay, well, what's the difference between those and how can that shape things? You also should be cognizant of and prepared to discuss any biases, stereotypes, or negative beliefs that the students themselves may have. Sometimes our biases and beliefs can harm ourselves or others, limiting their self based on gender roles, right? Circumscription, or maybe they're avoiding certain fields because they have negative associations with that based on some stereotypes and a limited understanding of what that actually looks like. As well, helping students understand how much their identity and environment is shaping their choices and decision makings. It can be conscious, it can be unconscious. And at the end of the day, you want to respect that people are going to have differing abilities in articulating that. And it can even vary from person to person, right? Because you have emotional intelligence and self-awareness, big spectrum, right? Big part of, student development theory is thinking about, how well can you articulate those things? And then it might even change between folks, or between factors rather. I can say very clearly that my class and my socioeconomic status very much shaped my upbringing. I grew up from a relatively wealthy background, so I never had to worry about paying for education. I was able to afford to live in residence all 4 years, which opened up a career in student affairs. But if you asked me, Cam, how have your religious beliefs shaped your career trajectory? I would have no idea what to tell you, right? And so I wouldn't be able to articulate that as clearly. Maybe it's because I just haven't given it the thought. Maybe it's because it just hasn't played as big a factor in my life. You need to keep that in mind. So, some advice to avoid. Understand that not every theory or every piece of advice applies to everyone. Again, you don't want to generalize, whether with any student. Thinking about the theory of work, right? Sometimes students just need a job to pay the bills. They can't take time to develop a rich understanding of their personality to design their dream vocation. Don't promote the myth that hard work is a universal key to success. I'm not saying that hard work isn't good, but the idea that if you work hard, you can do anything. There are so many other factors and barriers that people face, especially when you start to consider marginalization, power structures, privilege, intersectionality. You have to be realistic with students, right? Don't assume that work is central in everyone's life. The idea of, if you want this job or if you want that career, just apply to this, go to grad school in another province if you think you'll have a good shot of getting in. Because maybe people don't want to give up everything just to shape their career. Maybe they have family obligations. Never assume, be wary of inequitable suggestions. You should take a gap year, right? That's great if you can afford it. You should go to grad school. And hey, grad school is good. I always tell people you're never going to hurt yourself by having more education, but I would never just tell a student, go do a PhD. It's fine. Because that's a very long commitment and a very expensive commitment. I don't know what their financial situation is, right? I would tell them, you might want to consider this if you have the means to do so. Seeing a comment, yeah, hard work is fine, but it doesn't always address the real barriers. Exactly, right? So I'm glad to see we're already picking up on this message. And then, never assume that you have someone all figured out. Not all disabilities are visible. Not all forms of privilege are visible. So keeping that in mind and knowing that there are layers and dimensions and intersections to people that are always you can always unpack. Good things. And yes, this is the same image just flipped on its axis, which is why their wrist looks a little weird. Encourage them to find other supports, particularly with communities or support groups that share similar identities. That can be really helpful. Being aware of different opportunities for specific marginalized communities. One thing that I talk to a lot of students looking at medical school, and I'll ask, did you know that there are Black student application streams or Indigenous student application streams that could, potentially help or shape some of your decisions? Acknowledge barriers and discrimination. This is a term, you may have heard of it, beta bias, the idea of, I don't see color, and just pretending that discrimination doesn't exist. An example of this that I get is we have a lot of international students from China, and they'll have, their traditional Chinese legal name as well as like an English name that they go to. And I'll have them ask, do I need to put my legal name on my resume? Can I put my legal name? Will I be discriminated against? The difference between a traditional Chinese name and a more, North American one. And I would love to say no, be your authentic self, do whatever you want, use your legal name if that's how you feel most comfortable. But I don't want to lie to students and say, yeah, there might be some people out there with, conscious or unconscious biases against international students, against non-super anglicized names, right? So if I get a question like that, I'll say, personally, I think you should be authentic. You should do whatever you feel comfortable with. It's your document, your resume, your cover letter. That's an expression of yourself. It's your choice. But again, I'm not going to pretend that, discrimination doesn't exist in this country. Again, privilege is not always visible. So remember that. Encourage students to just be open to asking questions, exploring opportunities, and expanding their options. So those are all my tips. I know we've been going through quickly, but thank goodness for recordings, so you can go back and slow me down if you need to as well. Again, these slides are available. PDF is under the session material, so feel free to consult and refer as needed. Now, let's connect the dots a little bit. One quick thing I have is to just reflect on everything I said about inclusivity. Are there any individual behaviors that you might change based on this information? And can you think of anything in your institution that are going against recommendations? That's a little bit of a weighty phrase on my part, but think about it. Just put a Y in the chat if you can think of things that you might change or things in your institution that might change. An example that I can give is one thing that I'm actually particularly proud of is that Western does not give that many. It depends on faculty, but for the most part, no unpaid internships, because those are a huge barrier and inequity, right? Not everyone can afford to take an unpaid internship. So that's something that we go against. But if your institution does offer unpaid internships, you might want to consider that, right? So put a Y in the chat if there's something that you want to change. And if you're feeling particularly brave, create one actionable step that you can implement in your role. Share it in the chat if you're feeling particularly brave. I'm going to learn more about our international student populations and some of their cultural beliefs. I'm going to stop generalizing students, which I hope you weren't doing before. So I'm going to have a sip of water because I've been talking a lot. So take a second, put something in the chat if you are feeling up for it. Okay. I already see one Y, two Ys. Yes, thank you. Glad to know that there are some changes that we can make. Ooh, Y with 2 exclamation marks. Amy, I appreciate you. Okay. So keeping that in mind, just that equity piece, I want to more reflection, come back to, and again, this is something that I would love it if we could have 20 minutes and I could put you into breakout rooms. You could talk to a partner, but some individual reflection that we can return to. You want to put it all together, right? When do students talk to you about careers? And I apologize if you can hear my washing machine going off, but when do students talk about you and your career? As a, do you have one-on-ones with students that you supervise in classrooms, just casual conversations? And then if you aren't in a student-facing role, when do your colleagues talk to students? When do career topics come up indirectly? If someone just casually mentions, oh, I really hate Orgo, but I need to do it so that I can get into med school. That's an invitation. That's a career conversation, right? Think about that. And then the dysfunctional beliefs, some of the myths, which do you see most often in your student conversations? I'll tell you, for me, it is by far and away the idea of what can I do with a major in blank, right? The idea that your major determines your career. See that more than anything. Students come in and say, I'm in economics. What jobs are available? I see that more than anything. Then how can you address those dysfunctional beliefs in your role? We're not going to go through it now, but I encourage you, download the PDF, take the time to go through. I'd like to think that I scaffolded these questions nicely so you can go answer each one. Ooh, last minute panic. Why did I even take this program? Yes, very, very common. right? Students who are suddenly regretting their choices, trying to go back. One thing that a really cool framing that I actually heard recently is, the idea of like, I don't want to start over, I messed everything up. I would rather have, wasted the last 3 years than waste the next 40, right? It's you don't want to take a 5th year or 6th year of undergrad because I don't want to change my program. I'm just going to stick with this trajectory and spend the rest of your life being miserable. Look for and raise the profile of career co-op education or institutions. Yes, I like that. All my friends are way ahead of me. How do I catch up? Yep. Missed out on opportunities. Yes, especially with COVID, right? I know a lot of folks are feeling the effects of that, saying there have been limited internships or it's been difficult to network because of COVID. I'm going to learn about a couple of career development theories presented here. I know a bit about transformative learning theory, and I'd like to combine career development theory with it and see how that would translate into actual advising. Eduardo, I absolutely love that. Send me an email afterwards. I want to chat more. That sounds really cool. Looked at some of the dysfunctional beliefs in a workshop my department has worked on. You articulated some cultural aspects in a way that need to be emphasized. Love that. Okay. So, have about 15 minutes left. I want to be cognizant of leaving time for questions, but some common cases that you may hear. I just want to talk really quickly, and I would love to hear from some people in the chat. If a student came to you, I wanted to do a PhD. My supervisor told me there are no jobs for professors. But no. Right? We're going to serve up a piping hot cup of truth instead of coffee. Some things that we could say to this. I should have finished my degree by now. I'm so far behind. Yes. Yeah. What would you say if someone said, I want to do a PhD. Someone told me there are no jobs for professors. I would point out that, first of all, you can validate their feelings, right? And if they are saying something that is somewhat grounded in truth, yes, you're correct. That, tenure track positions are very competitive. There aren't a lot of them, but there are lots of things you can do with a PhD outside of academia, thinking about transferable skills. Many people told me social work will pan out and I never get a good paying job. Yes, another dysfunctional belief. Let's go on to some other, I didn't finish with the PhD one. Just kidding. Another thing I encourage people to think about is that, there are lots of values, outside of majors, outside of specific disciplines. You can't just be a professor with a PhD. And then also thinking about ways that we can combine work, right? You don't just have to pick one career and that's everything in your life. You can teach casually part-time on the side while working elsewhere. That same colleague that I was talking about who works with food banks and connecting community engaged learning courses to local community partners, she also has a PhD in English and taught a course part-time online this fall, using her PhD, teaching at a post-secondary level while also working elsewhere, combining her interests. For the sake of time, let's fly through some few others, and I'd love to keep hearing from the chat if you have ideas or things that you want to add, right? My academic advisor told me that there were no more jobs for people with this major. Again, majors aren't that important unless you're looking to go into a regulated, certified occupation, like teaching, for example. You need to have an education degree to get certified by the College of Teachers so that you can go forward. Everything else, it's more about skills, more about experience. Secondly, is that what you would even want to do, right? I have so many students come to me and say, I went into this program because there are lots of job opportunities. And I say, okay, so you're setting yourself up well, I guess, but would you actually want to do that? You'd be amazed how often the answer is no, and that people only choose careers based on, potential openings or prospects. As well, you can really unpack that, right? And say, okay, you want to have a lot of options. You want to have, broad hireability. Is career stability the most important factor for you? Because maybe it is. Maybe they say, I don't love computer science, but I like it. I'm good enough at it. There are lots of jobs there. Is that what's important to you? Yes, it is. Okay, cool. If it is, if it isn't, where'd you get that idea? My RLC told me I should go to grad school since I'm not sure what else I want to do. Again, grad school is expensive. They may not be in the position to just throw money away, so I wouldn't recommend that. As well, experience is good, prototyping, testing assumptions, and if you want to really figure out what you want to do next, that's great. You can explore that, but there are lots of cheaper and less stressful ways than going to grad school to try and find some direction or to test some things out. Last but not least, I probably have to do an unpaid internship, right? Any experience is good experience. Doesn't necessarily need to be in the field as well. Only take an unpaid internship if you're financially comfortable enough to do so. The process is the important part, because the idea of a real outcome is a fallacy. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sophia. The only other thing I'll mention, this is a very, very minor thing, but I hear a lot of students that come talking about I want an internship. And I say, okay, do you want an internship or a summer job? Because so many companies out there will just throw the word internship onto a summer student position that they're looking to hire. When we talk about internships within our careers department, we're talking about formalized programs that will earn you credit while you take a break from school for, anywhere from 4 to 16 months. You pause your academic program, you're still enrolled as a student, you're earning credit. Whereas a lot of times I want a job in finance for the summer. And so this bank will create, student internship when it's not really an internship. So that can be something to help clarify. And I'm not expecting anyone to become an expert on the different types of work integrated learning. Refer them to your career services department if applicable, right? And say, you can look at internships, but it might be helpful to define what you mean by an internship. Okay, one comment. One thing I wish I could do more effectively is help job seekers challenge or take power back in the hiring process. I hear a lot of complaints about the systems and employers out there in the labor market, and I always validate those experiences, but I wish I could do more. Yeah, that's really tough. At the end of the day, we can help encourage people and push them towards job seeking and, finding success. But if a company or an industry has, bad hiring practices, there isn't that much we can do about it other than just support them, validate them along the way. So I think, Amy, honestly, you're doing the best you can, it sounds like, in terms of validating their experiences and just trying to, still provide support throughout. But it is an unfortunate reality. So, gone through a lot of myths, a lot of myth busting. Again, some more reflection questions. We might come back to these if we have time, but I want to leave room for questions. So just take some time, think to yourself, journal it down, come back to these slides after. What are some key learnings? It's always helpful if you summarize it yourself. What ideas have been the most impactful for you? What messages do you want to relate to your students? And then the big thing here that I always think the most fun part about career development is that as I'm teaching students about it, I'm learning lessons that can apply to me in my own career, right? Do you see any content from today that will inform your own career journey? I might have been sitting here saying, ask students to, challenge where they form their beliefs about success. You might be sitting there being like, oh, holy cow, where did I get my ideas about success? So if there are any things that you see, reflecting or resonating with you in your journey, it can be really valuable to think about that as well. So if you want my summary, my quick thing, this is high school teacher cap coming out. Love a good consolidation. What do I think the biggest ideas are? Career development, iterative, ongoing journey, right? It's not a one-time decision. That's one of the biggest things that people need to learn. You can go around it. When I say iterative, right? You can go back, you can go forward. It's a process. It's not a linear path. Most career development theories focus on finding your sense of self, fitting that in with society. Misconceptions about career planning, like major to career linkage, right? Double major in genetics and classical studies, becoming a career coach, are extremely prevalent. And then many intersectional factors that influence career choices, goals, and decisions. Challenges for people with disabilities with lack of flexibility in workplaces, and the challenge of finding the best fit and also advocating for themselves. Yeah, absolutely a big challenge and something that we can work on and carry forward. So that is it for me. Love it. If you have any questions, welcome it to, unmute, put it in the chat, whatever. If you want to connect with me, this doesn't have to, we don't have to end here. Surprise, the career coach is big on networking and LinkedIn. So feel free to find me there. The direct link is in the slide, but as well, if you just scroll down within Feed Loop, it has, the presenter information with a link to my profile there. I'd love to connect with folks, love to continue the conversation. If there's something that you heard about today that you want to learn more about, or if you're saying, I want to take this a bit further, you just want someone to check in, bounce some ideas off of, always happy to continue the conversation. So got my email address, you got my LinkedIn. I'll pause here, maybe put up some reflection questions if we want to have a bit of a discussion, but I welcome any and all questions that you may have.